sometimes it's the little annoying pains like this one, and sometimes it's big ones. And we're facing some big ones. So tell me some of the pain that's in life right now. Some of this stuff that's difficult.
In life in general, or in terms of this chapter?
And in life in general, and it could be in life in your particulars, or that's facing all of us.
For me, it's the awareness of the dividedness of people. When my cousin posted this morning that Biden talked yesterday about unity, and she didn't hear anything about unity in his speech. I was just, I'm still dumbfounded.
Yeah.
And that's painful to me. So I'm trying to figure out how to get in touch with her, not through Facebook, but in another way, to say, what would it have looked like?
Yeah.
What would he have said that would have felt like unity to you?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's one of the pains I've been carrying with me today.
It's really difficult. I have that same type of thing, different experience, but my nephew Matthew posted, he lives in the Dallas area, so you can guess his politics. Right? He posted this thing that essentially said, I'm a good American, so I'm gonna support Biden as president, but, and then he lists all the reasons how he's not going to support. And it's like, you don't have to like everything, but let's be honest. If you're doing that, you're not supporting your president. Not if you're doing that type of a post, be honest about it. Right now I struggle with our president, type of post. That's pain for me, and trying to figure out how to speak into that is difficult.
I am not, probably no ability to comment on this topic because I am intentionally not on any of these things. And I don't necessarily agree with the fact of taking Twitter account for Biden off, for Trump off totally. But why couldn't they make these things like you can only use it like once an hour and only for 30 seconds? So I mean, because the problem with Trump was he went on and on and on and on and on. As opposed to just saying, here's what I think, period. And, that would accommodate free speech in that sense, but also would keep us from being inundated by, this ongoing line of rhetoric. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. The problem, of course, always is this, Art, that if I have something left to say and you're telling me my time's up, I feel like you're depriving me of my opportunity to have, it's that type of thing.
In the reality of the world, your time is limited. I mean, you have a framework within which you work. And so, okay, knowing going in that you have X number of amounts of time, okay, you organize yourself. Rather than just running off the mouth, you organize yourself. And so I have 2 minutes to say what I want to say. I say it, and then I'm off until I get another 2 minutes, I don't know, sometime down the road, but anyway.
Yeah, the problem of it is, though, is that whatever laws, whatever limits we put in may work for one person and may not work for me. And so for me, that law,
I'm talking about the general, I'm not talking about you or me. I'm talking about a commonality, a middle ground,
No, I know that. What I'm saying is that it's a pain trying to find that middle ground.
Well, basically, if everybody on both sides is angry, then we found the right space.
Yeah, maybe sometimes. I've definitely learned that there are some things that no matter how much I can see that it pains my wife, I like it too much to change it. Right? That type of thing. There's some things that are just, I see them as me, and I see that in my friends that's them, and they're not willing to change that. And that's difficult.
But, I'm not about it's quality over quantity. That's
yeah. So what else is painful in the world?
Well, the extent of COVID, I mean,
Yeah, yeah. And not just the there's all kinds of ways that COVID is difficult. Every time I see any of the numbers, I get a pain. But I also get a pain when I wear one of these for too long. I'm going, man, I'd like to be out of this, right? When I'm trying to hear somebody. So it's a lot of different little pains, some of them bigger than others, but
Mhm.
what else?
the shut-in part of COVID is the hardest part for me still. You
Yeah.
know, one of my daughters is, well, both are very strict about it, but one won't let me in the house, won't let me near her kids.
Yeah.
Even with masks and social distancing, we're
Yeah.
not allowed. We do things on Zoom, so we've started some things that have never happened before that are wonderful, but it's just very difficult to have, you know, approaching a year almost of not being able to hug my grandsons, and they live right in town, you know.
Yeah. And
The other daughter sets up, so we do a walk once or twice a week, actually, usually a couple times a week. So we're outdoors and we're social distancing, and that's perfect. So we have time together. It doesn't have to be inside. But at least I have a little bit of family time with her, which is really nice. So,
yeah, but trying to find what is that right distance, what is what's the right set of accommodations. It's not simple, is it? And sometimes
no, and the thing that I know about it is that she's protecting me, that her biggest concerns are to protect her 78-year-old mom,
yeah,
so that I'm not in the hospital like I was a few years ago. And so I have to keep reminding myself of that in spite of the pain of it. And I mean, and she has two guys who live next door, and they're welcome in her house. They come to birthday parties, they come to Christmas, they do that. They're back and forth all the time. So she's considering them part of her family, but not her mom.
yeah, yeah. And just that definition, even if you understand it in your head, it's a pain in the heart.
That's it. That's exactly it. That's
Yeah.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Okay, thinking back to when you were sick, you were really sick, you know, and
I was comatose and on a ventilator for the first week and
Yeah.
hospitalized for 7.5 weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jennifer doesn't want that to happen to me ever again, you know,
Right.
certainly not with COVID.
Right. Part of the difficulty with pain, though, too, is who we get to blame it on. Like in the political things, it's real easy to say, I know who to blame for that. You know, that's simple to do. COVID is difficult because it's harder to blame someone. We can blame them for the response to, but COVID itself, the virus itself, no matter how much President Trump tried to blame it on China, the cause is nebulous and difficult, and definitely not just singular. But we do find some really easy ways to blame people for different things, don't we? And in fact, sometimes we make that into quite the hobby, don't we? But I think part of what, if we're going to do revolutionary love, we also have to ask ourselves this question. How is it that I am the one contributing to the pain of someone else? Because if I can't see that these actions, this way of being is making it harder for that other person to love me, then it's hard for us to take the next step forward. How many feel that difficulty as you talk to some of your friends politically and you just say they're just not even recognizing what it is that's causing you pain, and so it's really hard to get into that conversation? But do you recognize where it is that you're causing them pain? So let's just deal with that. how is it that you know that you're causing pain to someone else? And I don't mean that you're wrong in doing what you're doing, okay? But that it is hard for someone else. One of my causes, for example, is border issues, right? And I know that's difficult for some of my conservative friends. Doesn't mean I should change, but I need to recognize that my stance on some of those border issues is causing them pain. And I may think it's just because they're allowing it to cause us pain. I may think that all of that, the pain that they're going through justifies, that the actions that I'm taking justify them having to go through some pain. So I'm not trying to excuse my actions. I'm trying to recognize that my actions aren't necessarily, because I see them as right, are not non-painful. So how about you? Where are some of the things where you know you're causing pain?
I'm going to do the opposite, is that something caused me some pain today when I got an email from a friend that I play bridge with regularly, and we are good friends. And he's already like 82, although you wouldn't know it when you saw him. And he doesn't believe in the vaccine. He's not going to get the vaccine. And that's very hard for me, being a doc. And one of the things that was my specialty is immunizable diseases. And so I know a lot about vaccines for all sorts of things. And for him to just, have many reasons that I didn't even want to hear. But I'm sad about that. But he's a very smart man, internationally famous in economics, but doesn't believe in the vaccine.
But see, Kay, you answered the question even when you said you weren't going to, because you believing in the vaccine, you knowing that it's a good thing, you pushing that as something is causing him a pain, because he's having to confront that he doesn't want to believe in something like that. And so he's having to, and I think you're right to push that.
I didn't push it. I just let it go.
Well, no,
I didn't argue with him at all, because I know that would be useless.
but
I just let it go.
But by push it, I mean, I think you're right to say that's the right thing to do. And he's having to deal with the pain that there's something that people think is important that he doesn't think is important. Right? How else are you contributing to the pain?
And I,
Kay,
oh,
go ahead.
no,
Jeez,
go
you
ahead.
guys are not just both called Susan, you're twins in your actions.
We both have something to say at the same time.
Go ahead. Go
Other
ahead.
Susan?
Go ahead, other Susan, from the other Susan.
Well, I was going to say that, so I come from a family of pastors. My grandfathers and my uncles and my dad. My dad is quite liberal in his politics. He's a retired Army chaplain. So that makes it all the more surprising sometimes, but he is. But pretty much everyone else in my family, they are all Methodist pastors, but as we all know, the Methodist Church takes many forms depending sometimes on where you are geographically. And my mother is very conservative but very non-confrontational. So one of the things that's challenging is when I say something or do something that she doesn't agree with, she generally won't say anything to me about it. And so it's hard to tell when I've hurt her because she doesn't really tell me. But I have been a little more, and I've tried to be kind and gentle, loving about it, but I have been a little bit more honest with her about how I see my interpretation of scripture, of Jesus' life, of the lives of other spiritual leaders, how I interpret those and how it is quite different from her interpretation. And I know there's probably not anything I could say that would be more painful to her. I try, and I don't bring it up very often unless there's a real reason that it seems I need to. But I know that it's hurt her to the point where I know she has talked to my older brother before and some of my friends, wondering, speculating about my salvation, a lot of things like that. But I know deep down for her, she cares about and loves me very much. I know she has a lot of respect for me, but I think she often wonders how, and I think she wonders where she went wrong. Like how did she turn out that way?
Yeah.
What I believe aligns very much with my father, but my parents are no longer married and they haven't been for a long time. So, but that's just one area where I know things that I have said and things that I do, and sometimes just who I am, it can be very painful to her.
Your story mirrors much of my own, where I left the religion of my childhood, which was my mom converted from Methodism to Mormonism, and I converted
didn't know
Mormonism
that.
to Methodism. And I know it pains her. That the discussion where I knew I was leaving was one of the hardest of my life. And it was the right decision for me. I knew it was the right decision. It didn't mean I didn't cause a lot of pain in that decision.
Yeah.
And right now in Methodism, we're going through such a difficult time that way. Sometime you're going to want to talk to our pastor down at the Wesley Center. Her name is Hannah. Hannah has a story not unlike yours. Her mother is a general conference delegate from the one of the Pennsylvania conferences. I can't remember which one, and is squarely in the "Don't Make Us Change" camp. And Hannah is a lesbian woman, and so here they sit on very opposite sides of that divide, causing pain for each other, right? And believing that that's the right place to sit.
Yeah.
Jim, thank you for sharing that about your mom's history. I didn't know that before. And that is just irony that is really interesting to me. Goodness.
Good Missouri Methodist with all the conservative aspects of it. So
yeah, my family is full of Ohio Methodists. So not that different.
Yeah.
Well, I come from Nebraska, where there's a lot of there can be quite a bit of conservativeness, but in lots of ways the United Methodist Church in Nebraska has been through the years until recently fairly progressive. So interesting that it would be that way. Of course, now we're in the midst of division and that kind of thing. But back some years ago, really, there was a lot of, it's a kind of that Western live and let live kind of culture, that allowed for much more diversity.
Yeah.
But the whole country has become so polarized, and they like being with the rest of the country. We'll just be polarized too, right? So
one of the reasons why I am a Methodist today is because Mormons have the right answer, right? They know what the right answer is, and one of the things I loved about Methodism is that we allowed the diversity of. And that's part of what we're struggling with. Some parts of Methodism want to have the right answer. And this is not the first time we've done this, right? At least part of the Missouri Methodist story is that Mormons say they're the ones who killed their prophet Joseph Smith and did all this stuff, and that they were the ones who stood on the ground of rightness, one right answer versus this new answer. And so we do this again and again, and it's hard for us to not take sides, right? In fact, the book kind of talked about how we almost naturally coerce people into inequalities and violence so that we preserve our rightness. And it's really easy for us to get into that space. The hard part is that very often we're fighting the battle for someone else to get the reward. And I feel like that's so true in our politics right now. I look at my cousin Bob, who I've sometimes told you about. Cousin Bob and I are about the same age, lives up in rural Arizona. Two little towns, Springerville and Eager, that jointly are called Round Valley. And he is firmly in the Trump camp and feels very akin to President Trump. And yet, if cousin Bob has ever earned more than $40,000 a year, I'd be really surprised, right? And yet he feels like this multi-billionaire understands him completely and wholly. And from my perspective, that billionaire has used people like cousin Bob, who and taken advantage of them and sown those divisions. So how do we converse across all of that? Because if we're going to have revolutionary love, that's the type of question we have to figure out at least some kind of answer to. Anybody else have a cousin Bob story like that? Somebody who's alienated from you for some reason or another? And
So let me ask, are we on chapter 1?
yes, we're kind of going to chapter 1.
So what's the answer? Art, did you read chapter 1? What's the answer to Jim's question? From the book.
I'm in the middle. I read the introduction and I'm in the middle of chapter 1. And I guess my main thing is he is documenting all the various issues out there of concern, from every different perspective, and so, but the real question is that what, from my perspective, is how are we going to generate the power to connect these pieces together to make a difference? There's another book I've been reading about the power of the elites, that have raised all the money and support all that. That's another book I'm working on. But the concern,
It's working beautifully.
Go ahead, Art.
They laid out a course of, use their money to buy their way into certain situations. And okay, that's they're a power struggle. That's why the top 1%, have over the rest of the 99. But how do we create the power structure to in fact, deal with it? We love to be, our diversities are our biggest enemy. And our splitting of hairs is even worse. And so how can we find a coalition to say, okay, I will, and of course, that's what Jim, as you know, that's what the whole, Industrial Areas Foundation was all about. You brought people together and you had 8 or 10 different issues, and I'll buy on your top 3, you buy on my top 3, and we work together on all those issues. But again, it was not enough power to move anything other than some local issue. It was never strong enough to really, at least from my perspective, to have any kind of major change. There's some things behind that I don't want to bother getting into, but I was hopeful that I could bring together people that would, say, okay, I'll work for yours, you work for mine, and we'll move it. We'll move.
Need rice to go with the enchiladas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing that's not true about love is that we're all of the same mind, that we have to be of the same mind in order to love. How many have lived with someone long enough to figure out that you're not of the same mind of them perfectly? Right? That being of the same mind is not what makes love possible. and when we're looking sometimes at the people we're most distanced from, it's really easy to say, we are not of the same mind. And so there's no way I can ever love there. And I just want you to know that that's not true. But we have to figure out how to get past those differences. We know how to do it because we all do it in many of our relationships. We figure out how to still love our 13-year-old kid when that 13-year-old kid has lots of reasons not to love them. Right? We figure out how to love each other when we're still angry with each other. One of my favorite cartoons is this older couple. She's sitting on a park bench and he's sitting on the other end of the park bench with his back toward her, but it's raining and he's holding out an umbrella back behind him so that the umbrella is covering him, right? So that even in the midst of the anger, there's still that sense of choosing each other. And how do we do this in this
Wow,
moment?
that's nice.
It's a good picture. I'll find it for you
That's a
and
nice one.
share it with you. That's what we have to try to figure out, because right now there's plenty of reasons to hate each other. The whole anti-mask thing just floors me. That's become a political point rather than a point of relationship. How do we get past that?
Well,
Go ahead.
One of the things that, I mean, we've spent the first half hour here talking only about, well, more than that, about the love part, but his whole chapter is a balance between what I would call the science part and the data and numbers, and the balance of how we can use, like with global warming he's talking about, or with other scientific things. His big one is global warming and climate change and so forth. But there's many scientific things that are fact, that are numbers, and to combine that with love is what I think is a wonderful challenge that I have had to face my whole life as a doc.
Right. And the hard part is this: how many, for example, heard that you should take a little baby aspirin every day because it helps your heart? How many heard that? Right.
Well, for many people that's true, but not for everybody.
I know. The last time I went to a doctor, he said, "Well, you know, there's a study out now that's saying that's probably not true." It's like, wait a second, you're telling me to drop something that I've held as truth, and I realized that in many ways that's what some of my conservative friends are doing in this moment. They're holding something as truth, and I'm telling them to drop it. But then I feel like they're telling me that same thing. And how do we hear that other person with a voice of love that hears it, truly hears it, not just, even if they're wrong, doesn't just push it away?
Well, I think your example of the aspirin, because my doctor likewise put me back on a full aspirin rather than the smaller one. And again, the reason was the data. There's new research out there. You know, things have changed. What was, you know, and so that's the hard part, is life does change. And, you know, the question is, who do you believe has the right, you know, we can't know everything ourselves directly with their own direct involvement. So it's all about who has the, you know, the right feel. I mean, that's why, you know, Dr. Fauci is so revered, because the way he talks to the basis of it seems, at least to many people, you know, speaking from a foundation of reality and truth. But obviously not everyone hears it that way. I do. But you know, there are just that issue of, and the world is changing. You know, we're learning things as we go along with this whole COVID thing. It's not static, it's evolving. And so that, and people
Well, you know, I can remember one of the things they taught us in medical school. I mean, one of the reasons I loved medicine and loved being a doc is that there is so much new information all the time. You're always learning. You're on a very steep learning curve. And they said 10% of the things that you know about medicine are disputed and gone every year, become new information. 10% of your knowledge is now wrong and you've got to change. And you know, in a way that's exciting, that
Yeah.
you know that you're always on a learning curve.
That's-
And so that aspirin is a very good example of that.
Yeah, you know,
That's
that's kind of what we were talking about before with between a religious stance where you have to know the answer and one where you're willing to kind of struggle with how is this playing out now in this situation. Some people just need, you know, the only way for them to be able to trust science, for instance, would be if nothing changed.
Would
You
be
know,
easier.
and the answer, and that, you know, it should be that way my entire lifetime.
Yeah.
Same as religion. And I think it's, both of those things are difficult for us. You know, that evolving, that changing is a struggle for all of us in one way or another. You know,
Maybe this doesn't describe you, but I find that what really gets in my way in these types of things is that my point of view, my way of thinking is so self-evident that it's easy to see. And why doesn't the other person get it? Right? And when they don't, it makes me have to question myself. Why is it so evident to me, but not to? Or to truly just completely blank them out, because if they can't even see this simple thing. But there's a lot of reasons why somebody doesn't see something that is evident to me, right? And
Yeah.
Go ahead,
For
Sam.
instance, just for instance, in astronomy, um, um, I have a friend that lives in California that still belongs to the Earth is flat, the world is flat group. I mean, and she is sure that that's correct because the Bible says go to the four corners or whatever it is. For instance, that's just one.
Mhm.
And I love her. She's a neat gal. But there you go.
Sure. And because she's basing her story on something that maybe isn't as important to you. That's right. That this is a literal truth for her, the four corners of the earth. And you see it very much symbolically.
I can remember taking kids at my fourth grade class. We'd go to the airport and the penny a pound flights. We'd pay for the kids to fly and they'd take them up. Now these are kids that had never been outside of Tucson. Most of them, the only place they'd been was to Mexico maybe, and south by Tucson. And they'd go up and fly around Tucson for a few minutes, you know, and then bring them down. What do you think? And they say, well, where's Arizona? Where's Phoenix?
Yeah.
And see, they're thinking that that's their home right here was it. And it was like opening up a new book for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were mentioning family earlier, and Jim, my father grew up with 11 brothers and 2 sisters.
Wow.
They were from Kansas and they were Quakers. And I never really got to know his other brothers. They were older, and I can remember when I was maybe in the 8 or 9 or 10 year bracket. My father visiting his brother, John, who were opposite poles. John was definitely Republic, and my dad was definitely Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
There was just no question about that. And it's the only time that I ever saw my father get red in the face when he was arguing with his brother over and over.
Yeah.
And yet they were really close, except that little item,
That big
you know, which was a huge item. Okay. And my dad we'd get in the 1938 Chevrolet and ride back to Grand Canyon where I was living with him, with the family. And he'd be calm all the way home, just unwinding,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, unwinding. And and he was a very quiet person. He mostly answered my questions with a question.
Mm.
And when he moved to Holbrook, he had to go there because of the dust or something, which was really a good idea from Kansas. But anyway, he met my mother, and she was, I don't know what faith she was, because she came from South Texas. And that's something that never occurred. But I know that when he was at a community church in Holbrook. And then finally, Berlin Ferris was a preacher of his at a Methodist church there. And then when they moved to Grand Canyon, there was no church, none. And most of the faiths would not let a minister go up there and preach because it was like a community experience. And they weren't going to pay for a minister like that. And it turns out that we had a Methodist minister who lived in Flagstaff, and he traveled from Flag to Williams to Grand Canyon. He was doing what do you call it when traveling?
Circuit rider.
Yeah,
Circuit
that's
rider.
right.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing.
Yeah.
And that's the guy I knew. And Grand Canyon had a Methodist minister and no other kind of church for a long time. The Catholics went to the community building with us, and the Mormons went to the community building with us, and anybody else, I guess. And someplace, I think it was right after the war, after World War II, that the Catholics began to have their own church service on either a different day. I think it was at the Bright Angel Lodge. We were still at the community building. And then later than that time, the Mormon church developed too. I think we stayed at there were 3 churches finally. And I don't know that the others had ministers that came up or priests, but I know that Ken Paray was another minister that came up there. I can't remember the rest of them.
Yeah.
But I definitely became a Methodist.
Yeah. You know, most of us have some kind of back and forth story about what drew us to where we're at. And
Yeah.
it's not because all of those were the right answer. They were just the answer that led us where they led.
That's right.
And yet we turn those right answers into singular, everyone ought to do it this way answers, which is why we often in church become very against whatever that other answer is. Baptist against Methodist, Methodist against Catholic, Catholic against Mormon, whatever it happens to be, because we want to have the right answer instead of recognizing that maybe it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
But can we open ourselves up to that? Especially when we come to really important issues, like, for example, the racial issues this summer and that we're still dealing with. Some of my friends, the reason why they struggle so much with that is because we solved that. And I don't want to deal with it anymore. And so we sit in that solved right answer, having to struggle into this new space that's where our Black brothers and sisters are saying, yeah, you didn't solve it for me.
That's right.
And are we open enough to be able to hear that? That's a space of privilege to be able to say, I don't want to, so I'm not going to. But we don't recognize it as that, do we? But where else do we do that? Are we able to take some spaces of privilege because of wealth, because of education? That's at least part of where my cousin Bob is complaining. You're busy saying you know more than me. Well, it's because I'm better educated than you, and I do know a whole lot of stuff, and you ought to listen to me sometimes. Right? And yet all of that comes off as you're not going to listen to me because of that. My education is part of my privilege that can put a barrier between us, right? Power and control. They talk talk about this a bunch in this chapter, because that's one of the reasons why we get into the spaces we are in, because someone uses their power, their control to be able to manipulate a group in order to. But isn't that kind of what I want to do too when it comes to general conference issues? And I think I know the right way the Methodist Church ought to vote. Then what I'm trying to do is get enough votes behind me that my way passes, and LGBT issues are resolved in the way I want, and the vote beats you.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily wrong, but it isn't quite revolutionary love, is what he's saying.
That's right.
But it's easier than that. And we often take those easier places, don't we? So where will you have to get off of your inertia in order to let revolutionary love take you towards someone? Right? That inertia that keeps you stuck. Where is it that it's calling you to be something different?
I took the Biden-Harris sign down from our front yard. There were 4 of us in our block that had the signs up, and there was another guy down the street a little bit that said "Anybody but Trump" and had that sign up. And I thought, I don't want to irritate the rest of the people. It's almost like a yeah, we won kind of activity, and I took it down. So did Al, and so did Megan across the street. We didn't do it we didn't sit down and say, hey, let's take the signs down. We just did it. And I wasn't being secretive about it. I just thought that, okay, we have new leadership, and I'm not going to slam it in anybody's face just because they voted a different way.
I put up a meme this week, and it was a picture of someone else's house, but I have the same thing happen at my house. And it said, I put up my Biden Harris flag today, and it had 13 red and white stripes and 50 stars. Do you get that? It's the US
Yes.
flag, right?
Yes.
My conservative friend says, no, that's not the Biden Harris flag. That's the US flag. I said, that's the point. We should be putting up the Trump flag and saying that's what I'm following.
Yeah.
We all Americans in this moment. And it's hard that way, because how many have a bit of a disinclination towards liking your Trump friends right now, especially after the insurrection of 2 weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's hard sometimes to be in conversation after those kinds of events. And yet, revolutionary love says we try to figure out how to have those conversations. Not in a way that excuses the behavior, not in a way that says, I'm going to give in to everything you believe, but somehow differently into a relationship. Can we remember that we're all Americans in this moment? Well, my conservative friends are having a hard time remembering we're all that, because you guys voted for the wrong guys. You guys voted somebody in that I don't want. And I know how they feel, because 4 years ago. But are we all still Americans? At the Tuesday class, one of the people brought up a book, I think it was by Tara Brach, or a podcast, and it essentially said, here's what you should ask all the time. What's it like to be you? Isn't that an interesting question? To sit with each person and say, what's it like to be you? because that'll lead us into that revolutionary love relationship. Because even if I mean, I don't have to agree with everything that it is like to be you, but to know why it is that you're you, what brought you to that space, especially some of those places that, whether I agree with it or not, that you see as hurting you, that'll help a lot, won't it? Just to know that.
Mhm. That's good. All I gotta do is write it down. Got it.
But that takes a lot of listening. During Lent this year, so we're already into Lent in our celebration planning. It's about a month away, but that's what we're going to look at, is listening. How do we listen to each other? And one of the classes I'm going to teach is one by Julia Cameron. If you know her, she's the one who does The Artist Way, and this, which is a supplement to that, is called A Listening Path, and it's trying to help us to figure out how to listen better. And we have to do that artistically. We have to do that relationally, don't we? But it's not a simple thing to do, because it often makes us look at stuff that will be challenging. Makes us hear stuff that doesn't fit perfectly into how we already have the world set up. But if I can hear that other person and bring it into my stuff, even a little bit, it allows some of that revolutionary love to happen. And hopefully they take some of my stuff and integrate it into theirs.
And even if they don't, hopefully they reach out and touch you with love.
Yeah, hopefully. The hard part about all of this is it's easy to take, it's easy to do simple answers. United Methodist pastors about this time of year have a task that they usually refer to with swear words, and it's called statistical tables. Right, Susan? Did you ever get some of those words aimed at you as a district superintendent? Right, all these things that where we have to count all the different things that are happening. And one of the reasons why that's difficult is because what it does is it says count things. Because the two easiest ways to count, to understand if a church is how a church is doing, is very easily countable things: giving and participation. How many people were in the worship service throughout the year, and how much money did they give? And those are not bad measurements, but they don't measure everything perfectly, do they?
No.
Right? Because someone can give $1 million to the church with all the wrong intentions. It could be a controlling thing, right? And somebody could come to church every single week, but only because their mom made them, right? Neither one of those are necessarily a good indication of whether they're truly a Methodist, or getting anything out of it. And yet the things that might measure that are hard to measure. How do you measure how much love is in a person's heart? How do you measure how much this conversation changed the other person or yourself?
Almost done.
All of those things are hard to measure, and yet that's what we have to be looking towards. How to do all of that.
That's a good session.
It's
This is a good session.
a good session.
I don't feel bad about skipping the U of A ASU basketball game this much. It's still on, and I can watch the last half.
Yeah.
I love it.
So as you go into your world, we're going to look at chapter 2. I will get you if I will send a chapter 2 out to everyone, so you've got it. You can print that out, or you can just read it online. And you can see that we haven't quite arrived at revolutionary love yet.
But we have arrived to the word revolution, Eric.
Yeah.
That,
And all of this is revolutionary because it takes
Yes.
us all off of those spaces of inertia where we've been stuck for a lot of different reasons. And it's
Yeah.
given us some reason to say, let me move from there. Thank you for your
Not bad.
thank you for your participation and for being here today.
good to see you.
Thank you.
Take care, my friends.
See you next
Good
Thursday.
night.
All right.